Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, July 6th, 2026, and today we will do the full fall Brassica breakdown because it's about that time, and rinse, reuse, repeat. Is that how that goes? I guess we'll find out, so let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. How on earth were your weekends, assuming you're not catching the show from a space station somewhere? Things are good here, slow-paced, letting the old body repair itself mostly all weekend, just while watching some really good World Cup soccer. Got a nice little hike in with the kiddos yesterday, too, as the heat is finally, at least mostly, broken. Definitely looking forward to what appears to be a vaguely cooler week with potentially some rain getting involved here in Kentucky and much of the, this side of the country, throughout the Midwest and into the South. You get basically like thunderstorm season where there is a chance of thunderstorms pretty much every day through large stretches of the summer. So will it rain this week? Maybe. On this side of town, but who knows really on the other side of town. That's kind of how it goes. A couple quick things. First, I hope your natural, non-toxic, PFAS-free face paint is ready for tonight's round of 16 matchup versus Belgium. That should be fun. Also, perhaps more interestingly to many of you, I will be doing the monthly live on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern per usual. So make sure to bring your questions and come hang with me. That'll be a lot of fun. I like those opportunities to go back and forth with you all, and that's something, we've tried to figure out how to involve that more in this show. But obviously, live shows make it at least a little bit doable. You can come tell us what you've been up to there, or you can let us know by sending in a 20-second farm video clip by uploading that to Dropbox or Drive or whatever, and sharing that with farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Absolutely always a highlight to see those. All right, so it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single, less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Today, the crop we're going to cover is not so much a single crop, but it's all the fall brassicas, all of them, all in one go, except Brussels sprouts, because I did that one last week. There are really three main categories of fall brassicas: long season, semi-long season, and fast as all get out. And I thought rather than try to cover all the brassicas all at once, we could maybe talk about each of those categories and how to think about them now for successful fall brassicas in a few months. First, now is the time for the longer season fall brassicas like broccoli, cauliflower, market cabbage, collard greens, Brussels, etc. In fact, if you're much further north than us here in Zone 6B in Kentucky, you're probably past prime time for most of these crops, or at least for Brussels sprouts in the field. They aren't really going to size up as well as if you'd started them like a month ago. Many broccolis, however, you could still pull off, though cauliflowers and Romanescos and some market cabbages, it would be maybe a little late in the season if you're, like I said, any colder than we are. There are also Napa cabbages that are as fast as lettuce, and there is still time to grow those out. So if you do want a cabbage, but you're like, oh, dang it, I missed the window. You didn't totally. You just grow those Napas. They're delicious. And in general, if you're looking for seed right now, you are trying to look at those shorter days to maturity varieties of those crops, like 100+ day stuff. If you get, hard frosts in October or early November, for instance, are going to be tough at this point with the sunlight dropping every day. Also, look for heat tolerance if you're in a hot area like us with our fun heat domes that we get. Those are super exciting. Another one that's somewhat easy to overlook in that, longer season category is things like rutabagas. Unlike, like the cabbage and collards, Brussels sprouts, cauliflowers, etc., rutabagas are generally sown directly into the soil as opposed to being grown in transplants, though some growers will use things like the paper pots, I've heard. I don't know how well that goes, but it is a possibility. Rutabagas are slow, like real slow. So make sure weed control is on point before you sow them. But what a delicious storage crop that rutabagas can be. I mean, they make some of the best, I don't know if you'd call it like mashed rutabaga. Mashed rutabaga, it's the best. Now, your semi-long season crops would be things like Napa cabbage, like I mentioned, kohlrabi, slower tot soy and bok choys, kale, mustard, etc. And for those of you who still have a little time in a slightly warmer region like mine, but you can also probably go ahead with them in slightly cooler regions as well. These, again, are roughly the same as head lettuces, like 50 days to maturity or so. And when I say go ahead, I'm really meaning to start them in trays. I personally like growing these in larger soil blocks to have all the time in the controlled greenhouse that I can get, usually under insect netting to protect them from roving moths. But they are short enough season that you can technically direct sow them as well, and they grow pretty fast. Crops like purple top turnips, a local favorite, and other 50 to 70 day turnips, plus daikons and watermelon radishes are always directly sown here in July, usually. They are slightly faster than, say, rutabagas, but slower than your fast brassicas like radishes or salad turnips or whatever. In fact, those last ones round out the fall brassica list. Radishes and salad turnips like hakurai are some of the last ones we will sow, preferring to start getting those into the soil sometime in early August, though late September in the field is also a possibility. You can also add some tatsoi and bok choys in there that are themselves quite fast in that like 35 to 40 day range. Ditto arugula, any brassica mix baby greens like that, mesclun mixes and the sort. If you are wanting to do a forage crop like turnips, daikons, collards, mustard greens, etc., kind of all mixed together, that could be used as a cover crop and a harvest crop, then I would sow those about 6 weeks before your first frost really set in. When I was an apprentice, my mentor Eric Smith at Bug Tussle Farm would do those every year, and although they weren't exactly the most convenient areas to harvest from, the crops did exceedingly well when sown and grown that way, like kind of all mixed together, and you could harvest well into like the hard frosts. Like we would be harvesting those in November, and this was in like 7B or 7A. Anyway, what we'll do is talk about soil prep for all those sorts of crops in the third segment. But up next, let's take a quick break and then talk recycling that irrigation water. Whoop. That's the recycling noise. You didn't know that. BRB.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
A quick and loving reminder that if you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Fred, who writes, quote, "Hi again, another water question. I'm planning a water reservoir to supply irrigation and wondering if I can fill it with water I've used to wash veg. The irrigation will have a filter, but what are the chances of introducing any plant pathogens or any tiny nematodes, etc.? I'm thinking mostly from soil washed off the veg and then spreading that all over via irrigation. Is this a bad idea? Should I send the used veg wash water into the septic tank instead?" End quote. All right, so this is a great question. And one thing I'm going to say to you all that I also mentioned to Fred on the Patreon page is that we did a video about recycling wastewater with Spencer over at Sage Hill Ranch Gardens in Southern California. That may be worth watching because they do a fair bit of this. They recycle quite a bit of the water from their wash station and have done a fair amount of troubleshooting that someone looking to set up a system like that might find pretty helpful. We will link that in the show notes. Now, the question of disease spreading is an interesting one, and it will depend on a lot of factors, on the pathogen or pest in the case of the nematodes, and how long it can survive in the tank, for instance. However, even more than that is how the system is designed. How these systems are generally set up is with a series of filters, because you can't really irrigate with chunky water anyway, right? It's going to clog everything. You will need to filter it down somehow before it goes into the irrigation system, which itself also generally has a filter on it, as Fred noted. So how you do that initial filtration will make some amount of difference in the risk there. For instance, if you're using some sort of straining system to get the big chunks out, and then some sort of charcoal filter, I would feel less inclined to worry about, spreading pathogens. If you're just running it as gray water into a field after, getting the sediment out, well, that could be a different story. So filtration is one part of the equation. The amount of time the wash water is kept in the tank could be another, because without a food source, those pathogens, again, depending on what they are, can only survive for so long. Some will survive longer than others, and there will be all sorts of other competition in the water itself. Now, the last piece of the puzzle could be sanitation. So that's not just cleaning the filters and etc. To make sure it's not becoming its own vector, but also considering some sort of UV treatments, perhaps, to help sterilize the water before it heads back out into the fields. That may not be possible for, I don't know what kind of electricity you have there, or it may not be financially viable, but it could be another worthwhile protective measure, not just protecting for food safety, but also for protecting from, spreading any sort of disease or pest. So you would filter the water, store it in a tank, and run it through the UV filter on its way to the garden, and that would help. That could be a great way to recycle the water, which for those of you out west, i.e. in like arid, drier regions where water is not as abundant or sometimes even as obnoxious as it is here, it could be a big deal, not only for conservation, but for expense. Even if you don't decide to do that, you can set up a simple gray water system to reuse the water in some way. Now, gray water design is a big subject, and it will matter a lot on where you are, regulations-wise, your property, your goals, etc. Like, for instance, we have our gray water on wash days flowing into a small pile of wood chips that is currently buried in vegetation, but there is a lot of opportunity there to like save that water and reuse it for, say, composting, like just, get those wood chips nice and wet, move them to the compost pile, and then you're recycling anything you washed off of the vegetables through those wood chips, and also, kind of sanitizing it through the composting process.
The water lets out right in there. Obviously, there's some clearly happy vegetation.
And then you would do that if you don't trust it for irrigation or just don't feel like building a complicated filtration system. Anyway, let us know, smart listeners, what else should be said about this particular topic. I'm sure there's more than a few of you who have some clever water catchment systems, and I'd love to hear about them. Or you can send a video. Also, that's also helpful. That'd be fun. We're going to take one last quick break, and when we return, we will get the garden ready for them brassicas, all of them. Be right back.
Welcome to Fare Thee Well Farm, Westward Vermont, Zone 4B. A couple of years ago, I did a YouTube search on how to grow carrots for the horses right there, and all of this happened. And so, yep, this is all Jesse's fault. Thanks, Jesse.
Overall, it's been a pretty good pest year for me. It's all working out in the end, kind of. Some things are late, but anyways, this is the balance, I guess, still learning. I planted my arugula and hawkeye like really close to each other, literally side by side, but it looks like the same pest likes both of them, and I'm gonna attempt to cut the arugula and then put some insect netting, and maybe I can get a good second harvest from it, but not gonna have nice tops. Hopefully the roots look nice, but yeah, things are coming along and it's cool.
Okay, so to round out this whole fall brassica growing thing, let's just talk bed prep, pest protection, heat protection, and some general storage stuff. On the bed prep side of things, brassicas are a family that like their fertility and like their drainage pretty well. I think that's most crops, but in general, brassicas love that. A healthy, nutrient-rich compost will go quite far. I find that a little kelp is a good biostimulant when it comes to brassicas. They tend to respond well to that, either applied foliarly or in the soil, but always check with your soil tests before going too bananas on any sort of amending. I generally recommend mixing amendments into the compost first and then applying it to the soil. And I also generally recommend a compost made from chicken manure if you have access to it for lush brassicas. If not, the best compost that you can make or get plus some alfalfa meal will do the trick nicely, especially if you are directly seeding. Weeds need to be under control, like I mentioned, before the crop goes in. Long season brassicas like cauliflower, market cabbage, the Brussels sprouts, all those sorts of things are great candidates for planting with a mulch or even into a thick cover crop mulch, though it can be a little bit tedious. With the distance between crops, though, 18 inches to 2 feet or 45 to 60 centimeters for those longer season brassicas, that spacing is not too bad. It isn't like, bok choy or pak choy where you are, jabbing 450 plants into 200 square feet or whatever. That would be like 18 square meters. That would be an obnoxious chore trying to get those tightly spaced crops into a cover crop residue or into an existing mulch. But with those slower crops that need more space, it's possible, and they will enjoy that cool mulch quite a bit, either from a cover crop or applied later, like a straw or a hay or whatever. For directly seeding the slower stuff like rutabagas, this is where a flame weeder will excel. Prep the bed, wait a day or two, sow the rutabagas, wait another day, flame weed, and then that should be, your weed trouble, or just stale seed bed, the bed that you're planting. Get it ready, let any weeds that are there germinate, cultivate it, and then plant. That's like the flame weeder without the flame. Anyway, compost mulch will also come in handy if you can, keep that wet, and if you have a good compost mulch to use. I like to cover any fall brassicas, seeded or transplanted, with insect netting from the jump. This can trap a small amount of heat, so be prepared. You may want to use it with shade cloth, but it will protect them from the vast majority of pests that will want to get their grubby little pincers on those brassica leaves. However, like I said, because it can trap a small amount of heat, a little shade cloth over top of all of it through the hotter spells can be helpful to just keep that stuff happy and healthy. Then the insect netting can be removed if need be once the cold starts to settle in a little bit and the pests calm the heck down. 30% shade is plenty for this. Irrigation is obviously going to be key, though, like I mentioned, adding a lightly colored mulch, if not using a cover crop mulch, will help tremendously with that and with keeping the plants cool. I also like undersowing fall brassicas with things like crimson clover for the fall/winter as a cover crop and ground cover. It germinates well without a lot of work and then outlives the brassicas into the winter so that just before the canopy fills out. Now, with storage, it depends entirely on the brassica, obviously, but with a lot of the classic storage brassicas, they require cold storage temperatures and can store pretty well in breathable totes for 1 to 4 months in refrigeration temperatures and high humidity, like maybe 1 to 2 months for Napa cabbage, whereas market cabbage and storage kohlrabi and those sorts of things, you can get upwards of 3 months and even up to 6 months for rutabagas. In fact, we had some broccoli that we harvested like a month ago that we just finished off last night that had just been in a bag in our fridge for like a month. It was delicious. A general rule of thumb for basically any crop is the slower that the crop grows comparative to the other versions of itself, the longer it will store. But that's not always true, as things like Brussels sprouts take 3 lifetimes to grow and don't store as well as Napa cabbage. That takes half or less of that time. But for the classic storage crop, that tends to be true. Like a longer season carrot is going to store longer than a shorter season carrot. That sort of stuff. The last thing I'll mention is that I like to undersow the longer season brassicas with crimson clover once they are really well established so that the crop will slowly turn into a cover crop after you've harvested it. That won't work in every situation, and you should consult your crop plan for that space for next year to make sure that having a cover crop there might not be a problem. But it is an option, and it is very pretty. It's nice to have it just be lush brassicas, and then after the brassicas come out, it's to be lush cover crop. Anyway, I think that covers the fall brassica rundown. Let me know what I missed or got wrong, or what little tips you've found. Otherwise, I think we are done here for this Monday. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No-Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of July, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Lisa Rudlaff. All right, thanks, Lisa. So for this week's story, we have a plant breeder, specifically a breeder of grape tomatoes. It's been Eliza's dream, in fact, to breed a grape tomato whose flavor was so exceptional that it overtook the, in her opinion, overrated popularity of the cherry tomato, put grape tomatoes on the map. And so one night, while Eliza is taking a stroll through the fields, observing the plants and having a glass of natural wine, she accidentally trips and spills the wine all over one of her favorite plants, a plant that she really liked and had loved the flavor of the grape tomatoes coming off of it. It wasn't a big deal. The wine shouldn't affect its progress, she thinks, but was she wrong. But that is for tomorrow on She Heard It Through the Grapevine. I don't know. All right. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.